Jason Fox of FIWARE Foundation brings us the keynote of the day on how to get your smart city project off the ground.
Good morning, everybody. Na fala português. So I will speak in an obscure island dialect from a small island in the middle of the North Atlantic, my own home island of Great Britain. I hope you understand English. Okay, normally I deal with the practical, with the technological side of things, but today I'm going right to the other end of FIWARE, which is where you're talking to city administrations, you're saying, right, I've heard about this smart, I've heard about what cities are all about. How on earth do we go about it? Now, as was pointed out earlier, here in Madeira we have a acknowledged FIWARE expert. Do I think give them away? And one of the things which we do there is we go through an architectural scenario. And the whole point of this session here is basically an extended architectural scenario. Stay here because otherwise I won't be on there. Oh, I wander too much. Okay, you're allowed to shout at me if I wander off that way again. Just, right. So it's an extended architectural scenario which builds up from a completely analog city up until the future. So let's start with the basic scenario. I'm going to talk to you today about rubbish. The fact is that most cities have got the basic scenario of trying to make the lives of the citizens better. And let's face it, when the rubbish piles up, or the traffic piles up, or the fumes pile up, these are the things people complain about. This is not glamorous, let's face it, but this is where you would want to start. You can't start with your super duper highway stuff. You start with something like waste management. So any smart solution needs context data. Context data being the, am I okay? Great, fine. Context data being the position of the now. What is the current state of the system? This is what FIWARE is all about. And if you're talking with a waste container, you're talking about things like the location, the filling level, stuff like that. And the problem we have, of course, is even here, we need to work out how we're going to get this information. How are we going to hold this information in a standardized format? And how can we model this in these entities in the real world? But you have a problem even then. If I come up with my own idea about what I'm going to do, it won't be compatible with the next project. Obviously, funding comes in a drip fashion. You need to make sure that these things are sustainable. And you need to be able to say, potentially be interoperable with, say, I don't know, in this case, someone working the Canary Islands, someone working Madeira. They need to be able to talk together. You need to maintain, this is all overhead. And of course, you want to minimize your overhead. Developers, we're fundamentally lazy. We don't like doing work. So you say, wouldn't it be better if we could just, push this off to someone else? And this is where you get onto the idea of data models. There are standard data models out there which cover a large number of scenarios which are used in smart initiatives. But the important thing here is that these are ones which are in use. These aren't theoretical ontologies. These are stuff which people are using already and you can expand on and extend. And obviously this is something which will be covered next week, tomorrow, in the data model session, so I won't steal all of Alberto's slides. But the point here is that it's done by the community. It's consensus-based, so that if I call it this, you call it it's useful, and it's all this stuff comes on from GitHub, so you can get adopted standards. Now, in this particular case, right, we're going to reuse existing data model. There's a waste container data model out there, which is very, very useful. And each container, we're going to have some IoT devices on it. IoT devices are going to have things like, I don't know, location or the battery level it's draining on or whatever. So you'll need all of these different models. You take the basic models and then extend them for the specialities which you've got. So at least there is a lot of it which is common stuff. And this is where we get onto NGSI. This is where we get onto, this is what a waste container based in Funchal, because they've actually changed the the location of the GeoJSON, -16, 32 should be right. The thing is that all these attributes we've got here, which are the ones in orange, are common naming for these attributes. But more importantly, if you look at the bit at the bottom where it's at context, that means that you can actually have any naming for the bits of the orange stuff you like. You could do it in Portuguese, you could even do it in Spanish if you really wanted to. But there's this at context bit at the bottom, which means that you would then translate each one of those short names to an IRI, which is this long, which is common, which means that, you know, you can even get a system, say, from the UK or whatever, could actually understand your Portuguese because we're agreeing with these IRIs. The rest of the structure here, which is something which I'll deal with a lot in this afternoon, is you've got properties and relationships. And those are the two basic fundamental parts of the NGSI interface. Either you've got a property, which is saying this is something about the current state of this object, or you have a relationship which is saying this is somehow related to some other object. An example that we've got there is that the filling level is being provided by a device. So you can tell that this is coming from there, and then you can follow the knowledge graph to wherever you want to get to. If you want to leave quickly, I would say NGSI is well-structured JSON based on REST, based on international standards. That means you can go off and get your coffee break now and you don't have to listen to me for the next 20 minutes. Device looks very, very similar. As you can see, all of these things are all the same in that they have a series of attributes, very flat hierarchy, which is just saying this is the status. You've got things like unit code and observed at, which are standard because obviously you want to be able to know what your units are for what you're doing. And observed at is used for temporal operations. And again, it's metadata. It's where you put the metadata properties of properties. So let's obtain some context data. This here is the standard architecture graph you'll find in everything FIWARE. You've got a context broker and you've got data coming in from your robots or your IoT or your whatever third-party systems. It flows into a context broker, which is like the glue in between the various levels. You then get some sort of processing, some sort of visualization. You do something with it, and then data flows back in again. The ones on the left and the right are things like making sure you can get it onto your cloud system or actually having security in the system. But the important point here about having a context broker is that you're not directly linking your devices to your knowledge. You've got this gap in between. And yes, it sounds initially like this is an unnecessary overhead, but this is the key to avoiding lock-in, because you can deal with any particular system, goes into a context broker using a standardized format, comes out of the context broker using a standardized format, and therefore you can move things out. So you can, in this particular case, we can trial with multiple IT devices. Maybe we've got a LoRa network here in Funchal. Maybe we've got a optical systems version in Funchal. You can try them both. They can just see, you know, this one works, this one doesn't, right? And then trial, and then move on. So there are already plenty of existing devices which have been certified as being FIWARE ready, so you could just pick one directly, or you can actually use an IoT agent to translate. But the idea behind a FIWARE ready device is purely saying, I can talk in this NGSI format. Yeah, as I said, FIWARE Marketplace is currently being refreshed with this new look and feel. Otherwise, you just take your devices. I'm going to have to get a new slide for this because we're going to run out of space with all the different protocols we can now fill with. And indeed, you can do additional devices. I'm actually looking one based on blockchain, which I'll be running a webinar in a couple of weeks' time, for example. But basically, that if you can't talk directly NGSI, you can translate and talk into NGSI. So we've now got some sort of measurement within our waste trucks going around the city. We can start reading the context data. We can start using the data. We can start doing stuff in a standardized way. You could then expand this to say, air quality, noise, whatever the problem in your city is. And of course, there's always going to be a problem. Citizens aren't going to be satisfied. They say, oi, they're doing all this stuff on the north side of the city, and we're paying our taxes. We want to make sure that we get our services properly. Lock up the mayor, whatever. So what you can do quite easily is say, how can you challenge these assertions? Well, you've now got data. You've now got data. You want to be able to display it and offer it to others so that they can make draw appropriate conclusions. So let's provide a mashup to display the location of the trucks. Or let's provide links to CCTV cameras, which are showing where they are. So you should say, yeah, I'm not lying, I'm a really good city mayor. What you can do is you can see that there are already either open source or commercial systems which will do mashups. Within the FIWARE catalogue, you've got things like Wirecloud, which I think the top one there I think is Hopu, which is a Grafana set, and the second one is a GeoJSON system. But there are many visualization tools, and obviously because we're outputting this data in a standard format, or in the case of the bottom right hand, we're doing in GeoJSON, which is obviously another standard. You can just get stuff directly on the screen, no problem. And of course, I've been doing lots of webinars and this sort of thing. So we solve the first problem. But you could also say use your cameras as devices. And again, there are elements like Currento, which is part of the FIWARE catalogue, which is able to output events in towards a context broker, saying, hey, I've just taken this registration plate for a well-known device. Okay, we now know the truck is here. Well, you can use it as a location point. So there's other things which you can add in as you keep on expanding the system once you've got this flow of data into a context broker. So we've now displayed it. We want now to start using it. Let's get some value. Waste trucks obviously require maintenance. How often are you going to service it? You're going to take these out of action every 3 weeks and give someone a lot of work for no good reason? Can we leave it for another while? But yeah, you can consider that you've got data about the system. You should start using this data to start gaining insights. You need to be able to understand what's going on. I mean, for example, maybe you'll find the brakes. You can work out the brakes are going to be failing because they're now having to brake harder than they used to. Because you can see the acceleration, you can see the movement. You've got a historical trend within the data in question. What you can do here is you can also notify changes. So obviously, say something moving out of an area, or when a specific circumstance is based on the. I haven't got a Q parameter on that one. This is just this is notifying all changes at the moment, but you can actually limit it to a certain number of changes. You can do it just on a periodic basis. Because the context data is changing, there needs to be some sort of asynchronous mechanism, some sort of way of saying, okay, now that my context data has changed, inform this specialized service over there. Maybe it's data persistence, maybe it's going into the artificial intelligence domain. I don't care. But again, the output from a notification is in a standardized format. Therefore, you can get someone writing that particular area of software. Obviously, you don't need to necessarily do it literally all the time. You can throttle this, but if you've got an asynchronous mechanism, it means you are reducing traffic within the system. So you don't need to poll all the time. Go off and do what's necessary. So this one is just saying, okay, give me the results of my filling level. I can then potentially display it on a graph or whatever. You can obviously split up the problem of predictive maintenance into multiple steps. The whole idea about having a context broker and everything means that you end up with a very modular microservice-based system, which means that you can change one area or bring in or build or buy a model to do the particular problem. So in this particular case, we're going to use Draco, Cygnus, Quantum Leap. These are parts of the FIWARE catalog, free open source software to push stuff into a database. Big data analysis, we could use Cosmos push into, say, Apache Flink or Spark, all this open source stuff. Or you could put it into your own, someone else's system. So subscription is part of these Lego bricks, putting stuff together to be able to work out what's going on. Simulating data. Right, so we've got our trucks going through the city. Are they half empty when they're coming back? Are they all crowding in one part of the city and causing problems? Do we want to have alternative routes? Maybe we've got enough, we need to get more infrastructure. It would be very, very silly to buy a load more trucks just because you think we might need some more trucks. It would be much better to be able to simulate these scenarios. You've got sufficient data and you know what the real life points are, that you should be able to start saying, okay, well, if I added in a truck here, it would do the following. It's going to fill up at approximately the same rate as it would do in that part of the city because we know the density of the housing in that area. Therefore, we know that if we move the route here, you can start using the concept of digital twins. We can start running lots of scenarios in different ways of doing this. Indeed, I know someone who's been dealing with predictive parking, and they have a lot of AI models based on their FIWARE system. As soon as you've got the subscription notification coming out, you're out of context world, you're into other domains. You're into, in this case, I'm walking again, aren't I? You're into, say, machine learning, artificial intelligence. You can start doing clever stuff as you would do, because you're now dealing with the data. And you don't have to deal with a live world when you're dealing with the data. But look, because we're using these data models, which should come out beforehand, we know what the structure of the input data will be in, and we're using a standard API for getting the context data. So it's much easier to develop your machine learning systems if you are talking to a standard interface. You can see here typical examples of how of attributes which you would have in a system, a city system. You can see how you would have the real life thing, and what happens is that you get the flow between those three layers which I was showing you earlier, where you've got the digital twin representation, the context data in the middle, and you can do stuff with it. Well, you can do that either in the real world, you can do it in the virtual world. And that was the one I was talking about, machine learning, moving a bit earlier. This is how it would work. As you can see, you move from on-premise, the FIWARE stuff, which is on the far right. You'd end up going through into a system which would expand as necessary to do the actual work. If those of you who've been paying attention, there's usually a link at the bottom to various FIWARE videos we've got. We've got probably literally 100 hours of worthwhile content in the area that you might be of interest. Let's augment our context data. Believe that the large, slow-moving vehicles are causing additional traffic. Makes sense, traffic build-up, people don't like that. But maybe it's just because it's raining and people are slower at throwing the rubbish into the bins. We don't know. There are multiple sources you could have about the same location. You could get the waste context data, you get traffic load data, weather forecast, and it's raining at a certain location. All of this is fundamentally about the same place, about the same thing, about the same ID. So what you can do then is you register an external context source, like your local weather forecaster, which means that you have data I know and data I know I can get from other sources. And overall, we have a holistic viewpoint of what the system is. The more information you've got within the system, the more intelligent the decisions your system can make. So you can see there are multiple ways you can do the registration. There are you can use registrations when you're doing actuations on devices, so that I can force something to happen. But you can also do this where we can federate data, so I can have data from one context broker effectively being in here, or indeed talking about, I believe someone's talking about I4 Trust later on, you get data sharing scenarios where I have data, you have data, we have common friends, and I want to allow you to have some access to my stuff. So registrations are used to make sure that we break down the silos. It's not just my data anymore, it's data which is potentially for common use. Let's move on to context data feeding back loops. Smart system. A smart system will only be smart if you can get a feedback loop. You need to be able to do something to the system. So far, I've just read in where the data in my trucks is, but hey, look, what I'm going to do now is, because I know it's going to be slow downtown because, in 10 minutes because my trucks are going to do that, I'm going to change the patterns of the traffic lights. That way, I can alleviate what's going to be a problem in the middle of town before it happens. There's a feedback loop here saying, yeah, we know we're behind, we can do something else thereafter. There are a lot of devices which are read-only. In fact, this is probably the major issue in smart systems, is that there's lots of sensors, not many actuators. But there are actuators which you can do either, in this case, it's a device, but you can also do actuators by nudging people or informing people, saying, now is a good time to get an electric vehicle into the middle of town because there's high air pollution, just by putting it on their mobile phone or what have you. So you use a smart system to get this feedback loop where you affect the real world, and you also read back from the real world what's happening to work out what the next decision is, so you can affect the real world and go around in circles. And this is how we get hold of measurements from IoT sensors. Those of you who on the technological side, this is a simple REST GET request. You can't get more simple than this. This is the FIWARE guarantee, basically, was saying, oi, if I want to get devices, I can get it with a simple request. If I want to actuate a device, I will do it with a simple POST request. So this means that developers pick up the idea here, because we're not reinventing the wheel. We're based on proper standards here. So I don't care really whether it's going to the LoRa network or it's going to Sigfox network or it's going through HTTP or what have you. That's lower down the system. There's this abstraction between the various different layers, so I can push stuff to the sensors or retrieve stuff from the actuators. This is a patch request because we're modifying part of the device. I'm changing the traffic light status to green, and you can see there's a flow of the data. But as far as you're concerned, I make one request, it happens. So I don't care about low-level IoT from the FIWARE viewpoint. We can move on to problems of complex event processing. Because now we've got, and again, this is all stuff which is available in the FIWARE catalogue. You can make a decision based on what the status of the system was over, say, a window of movement. So, were they within that, was the truck within that area in the last 10 minutes? Is it moving slowly? And. At some point, what will happen is, on top of the subscription you create, which is fairly basic, you can add in more complex rules so that the filters work properly, so that you can eventually get, if necessary, just even get into a custom microservice to, say, go off and do something. So you identify what's going on. Breaking data silos. Not necessarily the case for an island, but most places you can drive away from it, and you can drive next door, and as soon as you drive next door, they have probably got a completely different city administration, and they've probably got a completely different system. And if you're talking about breaking data silos, you need to have a neutral way of being able to push your data from A to B. And this is where NGSI LD, linked data, really comes to the fore. Because the linked data element, like JSON LDs, the underlying basis, means that I'm able to tell from a machine to a machine, this is what this data is all about. So even if I'm using a completely different system, if I can pass this data which has got this app context, which I'll be dealing with this afternoon, so I won't do all the complex stuff at the moment, you need to be able to talk between the separate systems. This is how it looks. As I said, it's just got this at context, at ID for JSON LD. Classic example is getting products on the web. You can go to a website, it'll show you how their star rating, their price, because they've marked up their data saying this has got this price according to this standard based on the at context. And it means that you're able to pass data on to somebody else who doesn't necessarily know who you are, because they know what the what's underlying the system. For NGS ILD, there's not that much difference between NGS ILD and JSON LD, because NGS LD documents are JSON LD documents. You can see the only difference is that we now have a certain amount of structure here where every relationship has got an object, every property has got a value. This means that, indeed, there are simplified formats of NGS ILD, which I'll be covering later on as well, but this means that the data is structured, the data can be extracted. And what happens, as I said, is you get the, say, an address element is actually the same as a schema address.org address element. As a human, you can type that on a website, you'll get all the data, but as a computer, you can work out what the attributes are because they've got additional stuff in the at graph and they've got additional stuff in the at context. So you can basically, if you have this at context thingy, you can use JSON as if it was just your own local JSON. Extending access to data. Okay, so next initiative, we're going to have a little mobile app saying, I want to put information in saying, clean up my street, there's graffiti here. You know, going to be really nice to our citizens, divert the nearest clean-up team. Problem is that we want to avoid people pranking us and just doing it anyway. You need to have, open the data, but it's open but verify. You need to have some sort of security around the system. And the point here is that if we go into FIWARE, you'll see the context broker itself doesn't deal with security. There are other elements, and we are actually agnostic to which security system you go for. There are other elements which would do identity management or policy enforcement, which would then allow you to permit or deny various things. Obviously, what you want to do in a system like this could be different to what you want to do if you're trying to get two robots to connect together, which would be different to what you'd want to do if you want to get two data spaces to connect together. But the point here is that because context brokers don't deal with security themselves, they are able to come up with other elements. Again, this is elements from the FIWARE catalogue I'm picking here. It doesn't have to be. You can use your own elements as well, which would be able to do the necessary security following security standards like OAuth 2 or IDSA or whatever. So as I said, we are security agnostic. I always leave that line at the bottom. Pick your own security needs. I'm not going to say use this security framework. You need to work out what your security needs are before you go off and do anything else. But this is just a selection of some of the security enablers from the current security enablers from the FIWARE catalogue. Whenever I say FIWARE catalogue, I mean free open source software, which you can build on. Opening to the future. Right, so what's happening next? I don't know what's happening next. Really, you need to keep your system open so that whatever potentially could happen can fit into your system. In this case, I'm going to have a street cleaning robot. We're going to make all the street cleaners in the city redundant, replace them with robots. Fine. How can you connect that to the system? Well, again, you've got context data in the robot. You know where the robot is. You know what the robot's going to do. There's context in all sorts of domains. Context in domains from energy to tourism. You've got this common data exchange. You can then reuse it. You can reuse this concept into the final system. So, particularly with robots, there are FIWARE components around robots. But the whole point about going through this interface is that you're not restricting yourself. You've got this potential to innovate in whichever direction you want. So you can pick whichever things you want from here. You can choose other things and deal with those as necessary. So how to achieve this in reality? This is the big question. Well, start from the bottom. We have a global summit. We have people from all over the world who will be discussing what they're doing with FIWARE. You can network with the real people to find out what's going on. Working my way up. You've got your local FiiHUB. You've got your local expertise who understand this, who are able to explain what you need to do. Talk to me. I'm here on the island for the next week. I'm going to be on his island for at least 2 weeks in September. I'm probably visiting my own island as well at some point. So let's see how it goes. But also, there are companies who are doing this commercially. At some point, the people are going to be selling commercial products in the FiWARE marketplace. Whether it's just the devices, bottom end, or maybe they're giving the entire city solution, or maybe they're giving consultancy. They're using this common interface, which means that potentially you can put elements from multiple companies together to give you a complete solution. We've got plenty of information, FiWARE Foundation, if you want to find cities which are already doing this, or if you're into smart agriculture or whatever, we've got information about it. And basically, that's FiWARE. That's how you do your smart city solution. So thank you very much for listening to me this morning. I'll be here this afternoon and tomorrow.
The discussion is now open. Please raise your hand for questions and identify to whom is your question for. We have time.
What usually happens is, when I do one of these presentations, we go for coffee and then someone grabs me and says, I've got this question for you. Because they're too shy to ask it in the middle of the audience. If we want to go for coffee, that's fine. I'm here all week.
How do you guarantee trust in your data?
Can you come up, come up. At least come near a.
Is this working? How do you guarantee trust in your data from multiple providers?
You have security components, whose sole job is to deal with the security of the system. So, for example, if you take the example of I4 Trust, which was on one of the Madeira slides earlier, in that particular case you have KeyRock, which is an identity manager, which has got the list of people who can do stuff. But it's got in that particular case, it's got distributed trust. There are other elements in the iShare system which would say, yeah, I know her, she knows him, he knows them, and therefore you can trust the guy at the far end of the train. So what you do is you split the data, the interface, which is the main bit for FiWARE, as I would call it, the NGSI interface, from the security concerns, which was that poll on the right-hand side, which was saying, okay, I need a security framework, I need the appropriate security framework for this particular system, based on whether I want to. I mean, obviously, if you're doing data sharing, it's completely different to if you're, say, talking between on a closed industrial pipeline. So you add in security components to deal with that, usually through the headers of a request, just to say, yeah, if I've not got the appropriate rights in here, go off and do something else. But the important thing for FiWARE is that as far as FiWARE is concerned, in 98% of cases, there are a few things which are coming up, I'll explain in a second, it's orthogonal. Security is security. Now, what's actually coming in, which is where there might need to be some more security directly in context brokers, is when you're talking about data sharing on, say, types, whether you'd need to make a request to find out this particular entity, is it of that type? In which case you might need to have some security held within the context broker itself. Of the three main context brokers I know about, the one which has probably got the most security built into it directly is Stelio, because again they had a business need to do that. Not to say that the other context brokers aren't secure, it's just they are secured by external components rather than being dealt with internally within the context broker.
Thank you.
I will be running a security session, I think, tomorrow afternoon. So you can ask me lots of horrible questions then.
Yes, I have a lot more questions, but I'll save them for the
Thanks.
workshops.
Any other easier questions?
Thank you very much. A bit too fast for me, so your presentation was like...
I was given
I have to have your presentation to study later.
Yeah.
To study later, yeah.
What I do with the FIWARE webinars is I subtitle myself.
Yeah.
And then you can put it on slow speed.
Yeah.
My problem is that my English is rather fast. I'm a native speaker.
No, but it was super nice.
Sorry.
My question is because regarding best practice in your experience, because I think that a system like this works with two essential stakeholders. One are citizens and people, and second are politicians. How do you have some examples or some suggestion how to involve these two part of the two pieces of the puzzle that are, for me, I don't know, but is essential?
Well, this particular example was smart cities, right? There are a lot of installations, FIWARE installations on smart cities. I think over 300 cities worldwide. What I would suggest in that case is the best way forward is to talk to a city which has already got an installation. There are some cities I know of who have flagship installations who are, say, based mainly on open source components. I think, I'm not sure the full details, but I think Vienna is one of them, for example, where I don't do the job end to end myself. That sort of end of FIWARE is further away from my expertise. So in that particular case, I would say the best thing to do is to say, contact Angelis Telado, who's coordinates the Smart Cities stuff. She will put you in contact with someone in the know, because this is getting so far away from my day-to-day work that I wouldn't answer that directly. But I know someone who can, which is the whole point of this. The whole point of this is that we're building a community. Yeah. It's not just what I know, it's what he knows, it's what she knows, what he knows, whatever, you know.
Yeah, because the capabilities for me are enormous, but I think we miss the people. So we have to explain a simple way to explain how this can be useful to people. Because sometimes, as we spoke about data, people are afraid to share data, so they don't know.
There is reluctance, yes, I agree. Why, I mean, even something like working out whether your olives are healthy or not. This is on agriculture. You know, olives don't have feelings, but the problem was, you know, well, if I say that my field is not doing very well, that's giving commercial advantage to my neighbour. You can anonymise these things. You can, if you have multiple, in a data sharing scenario, if you have multiple context brokers, you can decide which bits of data, based on your security system, are the ones which you're allowed to push over. But even better, you can have a proxy in between. So it might not be, you know, specifically your data. You could mangle it slightly. You could say, you know, someone's olives in the nearby are not feeling very well, or whatever it is. So yeah, there are security concerns within the data models. There are, I believe, I think it's it's the what is the EU recommendation on security. You can mark data as being sensitive or personal. Within the NGSI implementation, that's just metadata. And potentially you could use that to sort of strip stuff out or potentially anonymize stuff if you had that as a proxy. So there are concerns around this area. I totally agree with you. But there are ways you could get around it. And obviously, that would be additional to the itself, because actually within the context data, you want the status of the now. Yeah. So you don't want to have all the thing. But if you start sharing the data, that's when you need to be a little bit more ethical and think about things.
Thank you for your very interesting presentation. I just wonder, not being informed about these issues, what are the advantages? Obviously, there are some, but what are the challenges regarding competitive commercial solutions? How do you deal in the market about as an alternative solution, or you're not? The community is not attempting to present itself as an alternative solution.
Purely free software. Platinum members of companies like Telefonica. Telefonica does not exist to give out free software. What the FIWARE Foundation is doing as an open standard, we are the guardians of this interface. We want to make sure that everybody has got a potential to get a slice of the pie. If you're a small specialist who does predictive algorithms on traffic data, then we want to be able to, so that your module can get into, the monolithic Telefonica system, who are charging the large amount because they've got a big system. The idea is not to give you lock-in, it's to give you the opportunities across multiple companies. So this comes down to the big companies, like engineering or Telefonica, realising that it's in their interests to foster co-opetition. In that, maybe Telefonica works better in Spanish-speaking markets. Maybe engineering is better in Italy because that's where they're based. Maybe they've got one of them's got more interest in robotics, one of them's got more interest in smart cities. So you end up being able to sell a commercial product. There are obviously commercial products in FIWARE. Someone's going to pay my wages.
I wonder about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's paying for all this?
But the whole point is that they must sell it on some sort of specialism behind their system. We're quick, we're cheap, we're fast, we're whatever. Now, the USP of FIWARE compared to vendor-specific systems, I won't mention any names because I don't mention any competitors, is purely because we have this open standard. Obviously, they can also use open source software in their system, but they can't state that, okay, you buy my system, we'll probably let you modify it and tinker it. And you can change the code in FIWARE if you wanted to. You can raise a PR request on the code, or fork the context broker, or fork the element you're using to change it for the way you want to use it. And that's where we have this USP. That's where we should be trying to push, saying, build your city on a FIWARE-based system. As you can see, I've not been saying, just buy NEC products. I've been saying any product which has got using this interface is potentially of use, which obviously puts a lot of power back to the city administration, because then they can say, right, well, will you be interoperable with this system we just bought from the Italians? And if they say no, you can say, well, thank you very much, go away.
Mm-hmm. So customization is an aspect.
I think customization is a key, because obviously, even in cities, every city is different. Agriculture is a good example where literally every location is different because of the climate. But the challenges from a city like Funchal will be different to one like, Lisbon, purely on size, purely on location, purely on economy, on all sorts of reasons. So you might want to have innovation in different areas based on what your local conditions are.
Thank you.